It begins like a whisper you barely notice at first, a tug in the chest, a pause between breaths, a stillness that follows you through the chaos of everyday life. You go about your routine as you always have. Wake up, scroll through the phone, drink the bitter coffee, show up for others in ways you were never shown up for yourself. But something feels different, not louder, not heavier, just different. It's not sadness, but it carries the same weight. Not quite fear, but still unsettling. Like the soft knocking of a truth you've ignored for too long. A truth that doesn't demand anything from you but acknowledgement. And yet it shakes you, because you know, once you look it in the eye, you'll never see life the same way again. That truth is simple, though heavy with consequence. You've lost yourself, and not in a dramatic, scream into the void kind of way. Number it happened quietly, piece by piece, in compromises too small to notice at first, in moments where you said, it's fine, when it wasn't, in every time you stayed silent just to keep the peace, in every smile that hid your exhaustion, in every yes that should have been no. You traded your intuition for approval, your boundaries for belonging, your truth for acceptance. And it worked for a while. You played the role. You became who you thought they needed you to be. But eventually the weight of pretending grew too heavy to carry. And now, here you are, standing in the center of a life you built and realizing it doesn't feel like home. You don't hate it. You've convinced yourself it's fine. You're lucky after all. You have what others dream of. You check the boxes, you wear the mask well. But when the noise dies down and you're alone with your thoughts, something in you aches. Not because your life is broken, but because somewhere along the way, you forgot what it meant to be whole. You've been running on autopilot, and now your soul is asking you to wake up. Not with panic, with purpose, with presence. So you pause. Maybe for the first time in a long time, you let the silence stretch. You put down your phone. You stop trying to fill the void with noise. And in that sacred stillness, the questions begin to rise. Who am I without the roles I play? Without the titles? Without the expectations? What do I actually want? Not what I was told to want. What makes me feel alive? When was the last time I truly listened to myself? The answers don't come right away, but the asking is where it begins. You start to remember things, not always with clarity, but with a feeling. You remember how you used to dream before the world taught you to doubt. You remember how you used to speak without filtering every word through fear. You remember how laughter once came easily, how silence once felt safe, how your own company was once enough. And maybe you cry, not because you're weak, but because you realize how long it's been since you felt like yourself. And still, you keep showing up. You go to work. You smile at strangers. You do what needs to be done. But now you carry something different. Not just the weight of what you've lost, but the seed of what you're finding. You don't know what it will grow into, but you can feel it. Something inside you wants more. Not more stuff, not more success, more soul, more connection, more truth. You begin to notice things you used to ignore. How certain spaces make you shrink. How certain conversations leave you drained. How certain people only love the version of you that serves them. And it hurts. Because once you start waking up, you can't go back to sleep. You can't unsee the places where you betrayed yourself. You can't unknow the ways you've settled. And you can't unfeel the hunger for something more. But instead of numbing it this time, you let it rise. You sit with it. You stop running. You breathe into it. You ask yourself what it's trying to tell you. And slowly the answers begin to form. Not in words, but in nudges. In urges to rest, to journal, to cry, to change your mind, to say no, to say yes, to finally start living in alignment with what you feel instead of what you're supposed to feel. It's not easy. The people around you may not understand. They've known you as the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the always there for everyone else. And now you're changing the script. You're setting boundaries. You're taking space. You're saying, I need time to figure this out. And it makes them uncomfortable because your growth reveals their stagnation. Your truth threatens their illusion. And so they resist. They push back. They call you distant, dramatic, different. And you are. You're finally becoming who you were always meant to be. It's tempting to retreat, to shrink back into what's familiar, to apologize for your evolution. But you don't. Not this time. You stay with yourself, in the mess, in the questions, in the becoming, because you finally realized losing yourself was never the plan, but finding yourself is the gift. And every hard conversation, every tear shed, every boundary honored is a step back home. You start rebuilding, not all at once, but in moments, in morning rituals, in saying no without guilt, in walking away from what no longer feels right, in choosing rest over hustle, in honoring your intuition, even when it makes no sense to anyone else. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop waiting to be chosen. You choose yourself, not out of ego, but out of necessity. Because you know now, no one can save you from a life you built by abandoning yourself. Only you can dismantle it. Only you can rise from its ruins. And you do. It's subtle at first. You start speaking your truth in small ways. You say what you mean. You ask for what you need. You stop pretending you're okay when you're not. You stop shrinking your joy to make others comfortable. You begin to trust yourself, not because you've figured everything out, but because you finally believe that your voice matters. And the more you trust yourself, the more you change. Not just on the outside, on the inside. You find strength in your softness, wisdom in your wounds, clarity in your stillness. You're not chasing approval anymore. You're choosing alignment. You're not seeking validation. You're embodying truth. And with each step, you feel lighter, more grounded, more whole. You're not the person you used to be. You don't even want to be. You're someone new, someone who honors the whispers, someone who values depth over distraction, someone who doesn't need to be everything for everyone, just everything to yourself. And that changes everything. There's a strange sense of grief that rises when you finally begin to reclaim yourself. Not grief over who you are now, but over all the versions of yourself that had to be abandoned along the way just to survive. You think back to the younger version of you, the one who just wanted to be loved, to be seen, to be accepted. And you realize how many times that tender version of yourself was left behind in favor of fitting in, being liked, avoiding rejection. And even though you now stand stronger, wiser, and more in tune with your truth than ever before, the ache of what was lost still lingers. It isn't regret, it's reverence, a sacred mourning for the years you couldn't be you. Not because you didn't want to, but because you didn't know how. And now as you sit in this quiet reclamation of self, you begin to feel something awaken, a deep sense of compassion, not just for the world, not just for those who hurt you or misunderstood you, but for yourself, for the you who stayed silent to avoid conflict, for the you who kept giving long after you had nothing left, for the you who kept showing up with a smile while breaking inside. You finally see them not as weak or foolish, but as brave, incredibly brave, because they survived. And survival may not look pretty, but it is still sacred. It's still worthy of honor. And in honoring those pieces of you that once felt shame, you begin to reclaim your power. Not the kind that roars, the kind that hums, quiet, steady, unshakable. You notice how your relationship with your emotions has changed. You don't resist them the way you used to. You don't label them as good or bad. You simply let them be. You allow the sadness to flow through you like water without needing to bottle it up or turn it into something useful. You let your anger speak without making it a monster. You let your joy expand without waiting for the other shoe to drop. You feel everything fully, honestly, and in doing so, you become more alive. Because to feel is not to be weak, it is to be real, and you're done with pretending to be anything less than real. There is an honesty to your presence now that can't be faked. People sense it before you say a word. They feel it in the way you walk into a room. Not demanding attention, but not denying your worth either. You no longer need to be the loudest voice to be heard. You don't need to be the most charming, the most successful, the most agreeable. You just need to be true. And that truth is more powerful than anything you ever performed. You start making decisions that used to terrify you. You say no to things that once defined your identity. You leave spaces that once felt like your only source of belonging. You release relationships that were built on a version of you that no longer exists. And it doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough to stop pretending. It means you love yourself enough to walk away from anything that asks you to sacrifice your soul. You no longer apologize for your boundaries. You no longer over-explain your choices. You no longer seek to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You let them think what they will. You let them create their stories. Because now your energy is not for convincing, it's for creating. And you are creating something sacred. A life that feels like yours. There's a tenderness in the way you move through the world now. You speak slower, you listen deeper, you pause before reacting. You let people have their stories without making them your own. You stop needing to fix, to rescue, to carry. You've laid down the burden of being the hero because you understand now everyone must walk their own path. And your job is not to save others. It's to stay true to yourself, to hold space without absorbing, to love without losing, to care without collapsing. Your solitude becomes a sanctuary instead of a sentence. You no longer see being alone as evidence of lack. You see it as an opportunity, a return, a reconnection. You find joy in your own company. You savor the quiet. You honor your own rhythm. You stop filling the void with noise, with distractions, with people who only stay for the parts of you that benefit them. You stop begging for crumbs when you can cook a feast for yourself. You stop begging to be invited when you build a home inside your own soul. And the more you inhabit your own life, the less you fear being misunderstood. You no longer dilute your truth to be palatable. You no longer shrink your success to make others feel comfortable. You no longer pretend to be less intuitive, less sensitive, less aware. You own it, all of it, not with arrogance, but with peace. Because this is who you are. And who you are is not a problem to solve. Who you are is a gift you're learning to finally unwrap. Your dreams begin to change. They're no longer shaped by comparison or competition. They're not about proving your worth or escaping your reality. They are rooted in joy, in alignment, in purpose. You stop asking, what will make me successful? And start asking, what will make me whole? And the answers surprise you. They're often simpler than you imagined. A slower morning, a deeper conversation, a meaningful connection, the courage to say no, the audacity to rest, the freedom to simply be. You notice how much more alive you feel when you stop performing, when you stop trying to impress people who wouldn't recognize your soul even if it stood right in front of them. You stop dressing for attention. You dress for expression. You stop talking to be heard. You speak to connect. You stop rushing to the next thing. You learn to savor the now. And in that now, everything begins to bloom. Not because life is perfect, but because you're finally present for it. You begin to trust the unfolding. You stop needing to know how it all ends. You stop clinging to plans that were born out of fear. You loosen your grip. You open your hands. You let the river take you, not because you've given up, but because you've learned to trust your flow. You've learned that detours are often destinations, that breakdowns are often breakthroughs, that the path is not linear, but it is sacred. And in this sacred unfolding, you begin to see others differently too, with more compassion, more curiosity, less judgment. You see the masks they wear, not as lies, but as protection. You see the anger, the defensiveness, the distance, not as rejection, but as pain. You stop taking things personally. You stop needing others to be healed for you to feel safe, because you've created your own safety. And from that place, you can love more freely, without attachment, without agenda, just love, pure, clean, whole. You stop measuring your worth by your output. You no longer hustle for your value. You understand now that your worth is not negotiable. It is not based on how much you give, how well you perform, or how many people approve. Your worth simply is unshakable, undeniable, unchanging. And when you live from that knowing, your entire world begins to change, not because the world itself is different, but because you are different within it. You rest more, not as a reward, but as a requirement. You stop waiting until burnout to take a break. You stop calling exhaustion noble. You learn to honor your limits, to listen when your body whispers, slow down. You no longer see rest as laziness. You see it as medicine, as wisdom, as a sacred yes to your own aliveness. And in all of this quiet rebellion, this sacred return, this soul reclamation, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Wholeness, not because you have it all figured out, but because you've finally stopped abandoning yourself. You've come back home, and this time you're staying. The journey keeps going, not with the noise of sudden change or the roar of radical transformation, but with the subtle rhythm of rediscovery. You begin to understand that healing isn't a destination you arrive at with a suitcase full of answers. It's the road you're walking every day, even when your feet are tired, even when the path is unclear. And some days you wake up and feel the pull of old patterns like gravity in your bones. You feel the temptation to go back, to blend in, to shrink yourself into something familiar, something safe. And you know it's not because you're weak, it's because you're human. You carry the echoes of every place you've been, every version of yourself you've ever been asked to become. And on those days, it takes everything in you to remember that going back would mean losing the part of you you've worked so hard to find. You begin to see the difference between comfort and alignment. Comfort is easy. It's the path you already know, the role you've already rehearsed, the silence you've already mastered. But alignment, that's something else. Alignment asks for your attention. It demands your truth. It invites you to be seen in ways that are raw and vulnerable and terrifying. And sometimes you resist it. Sometimes you tell yourself that the old way wasn't so bad, that maybe you were being too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult. But then you remember how it felt to be invisible in your own life. You remember how it felt to hear your own voice and still not listen. You remember the price you paid to keep others comfortable and how it nearly cost you your soul. So you keep walking, one honest step at a time. You make small decisions that honor who you are now. You say no when something doesn't feel right, even if you can't explain it. You take a break before you hit your limit. You stop pushing yourself to keep up with people who are running in a race that was never meant for you. You begin to understand that your pace is sacred. Your rhythm is divine, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for why you're moving slower now. You're not behind. You're in tune. You start to feel things in your body before you register them in your mind. You notice how your chest tightens around certain people, how your energy drops in certain spaces, how your breath becomes shallow when you abandon yourself. And you no longer ignore those signs. You don't call it overthinking. You don't dismiss it as paranoia. You trust it because your body remembers what your mind forgot. It knows what safety feels like. It knows what truth sounds like. And you begin to trust that your body is not the enemy. It is the messenger. It is the compass guiding you home. Home begins to look less like a place and more like a practice. It's the way you check in with yourself at the end of the day, the way you wrap your arms around your own ache, the way you give yourself permission to not be okay without turning it into a crisis. You no longer need a reason to rest. You no longer need a reason to protect your energy. You don't have to earn your right to say, "This isn't working for me." You no longer need to justify your peace. The people who truly see you now are not the ones clapping the loudest. They are the ones who sit beside you when there is nothing to celebrate. They don't need you to entertain. They don't ask you to explain your boundaries. They respect the silence. They meet your honesty with honesty. And when you say, "I'm still figuring it out," they don't try to fix you. They just hold space. And you realize that's all you ever needed. Not to be fixed, but to be held. Not to be changed, but to be loved exactly as you are. You stop keeping score. You stop measuring your progress by how perfect your days look. You start asking yourself, "Did I stay with myself today?" And on the days when the answer is yes, you breathe deeper. On the days when it's no, you don't punish yourself. You just try again. Because now your healing isn't about being flawless. It's about being faithful to your truth, to your needs, to your journey. You stop seeing your sensitivity as a burden. You begin to see it as a gift. The way you feel things deeply, the way you notice when something's off, the way you carry the emotions of a room. It's not a flaw. It's a language, a form of wisdom. And you stop apologizing for speaking it. You stop trying to toughen up or grow a thicker skin. Instead, you learn to honor your softness, to protect it, to offer it only where it is safe to do so. And in that protection, you discover power. Not the kind that crushes, but the kind that endures. The kind that blooms. The old you may try to return from time to time. You might hear the whispers of old beliefs, the ones that say you're too much or not enough, the ones that tell you to stay quiet, stay small, stay agreeable. But now you have a choice. You have awareness. You've created distance between your thoughts and your truth. And when those voices rise, you don't fight them. You don't believe them. You simply say, "I know where you come from, but I don't live there anymore." You stop needing others to walk your path to validate it. You stop comparing your healing to someone else's timeline. You understand now that you're not late. You're not wrong. You're not failing. You're unfolding in your own time, in your own way. And what you're building inside you cannot be rushed. It's not a sprint. It's not a performance. It's a becoming. And every day you choose yourself. You water that becoming. You find joy in places you never thought to look, in cleaning your space, in cooking a simple meal, in rereading your favorite book, in watching the way sunlight falls across the floor. These are the moments you once ignored in your rush to be somewhere else. Now they are sacred. Now they are enough. Because you are no longer chasing a life that looks good. You are living a life that feels good. And that shift, that one tiny, immeasurable shift, changes everything. And maybe not everyone will understand this new version of you. Maybe they'll say you've changed, and you'll smile. Because you have. Because you're no longer abandoning yourself to be chosen. Because you're no longer dimming your light to make others feel less alone in their shadows. Because you're finally choosing you. And if that makes you different, then let it. Because different is the beginning of authentic. And authentic is where freedom lives. You know now that peace isn't found in the absence of discomfort. It's found in the commitment to your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You are not the chaos you walk through. You are not the mistakes you made when you didn't know better. You are not the version of you that stayed too long or left too soon. You are the one who chose to begin again, the one who chose to listen, the one who chose to stay when it would have been easier to run. And that choice, that quiet, consistent, sacred choice, is everything. There's something transformative about learning to trust your own voice again after years of silencing it. It doesn't return in a thunderous declaration or a flood of certainty. It tiptoes back into your life like a hesitant guest, unsure if it's welcome. You feel it first, not in your words, but in your body, in the way your chest expands when you speak your truth, even in small ways, in the way your stomach unclenches when you say no and mean it, in the way your shoulders loosen when you allow yourself to leave a room that drains you. These are not loud acts, but they are radical, because for so long, you were taught that your truth was too much, your needs too inconvenient, your presence only valuable if it was easy to digest, and now you're unlearning all of that. Gently, deliberately, honestly, you begin to recognize the ways you were conditioned to betray yourself. Not out of malice, but out of survival. How you learned to laugh when you weren't amused. How you nodded in agreement while your soul begged you to speak. How you stayed in rooms long after your spirit had already left. And when you think about it too long, it hurts. The weight of all those moments piles up in your chest like grief. But this isn't the kind of grief that breaks you. It's the kind that opens you, that teaches you to hold space for the parts of yourself that had to go quiet just to get by. You no longer call it weakness. You no longer shame the version of you who stayed silent. You thank them because they got you here. And now that you're here, you're building something new. Not a fortress to keep people out, but a foundation to hold yourself up. You're not trying to become someone different. You're remembering who you were before the world told you to be someone else. And that remembering is sacred. It is slow. It is not something you can rush because it is not something you can fake. It is something you feel layer by layer as you return to yourself. And in that return, you find peace. Not the peace that comes from everything being perfect, but the peace that comes from being present. Present with your own experience. Present with your own emotions. Present with your own needs. You stop rushing to fix things that aren't broken. You stop gaslighting yourself into believing you're overreacting. You start trusting the wisdom in your discomfort, the truth in your unease, the guidance in your resistance. You no longer need proof to honor your intuition. Your knowing is enough. Your days begin to feel different, not because your schedule has changed, but because your relationship to yourself has. You move through your life with a softness you once reserved only for others. You speak to yourself in tones you once only used with those you loved. You stop pushing yourself past your limits for the sake of productivity. You begin to ask yourself what you actually want, not what you're supposed to want, not what looks impressive on paper, but what feels true. And the answers you receive are not always grand. They're often quiet, gentle, simple, a slower morning, a real conversation, a deeper breath. You begin to build your life around these small truths. And in doing so, everything shifts. You find yourself letting go of people who no longer feel aligned, not because you don't love them, but because you love yourself too much to keep shrinking for their comfort. You stop trying to fix relationships that require your silence to survive. You stop hoping that one day they'll understand, that one day they'll meet you in the depth you crave. You let them go with grace, with gratitude, with the understanding that not every connection is meant to last forever. Some are meant to teach you how to come back to yourself. Some are meant to show you what you never want to feel again. Some are meant to end so you can begin. And beginnings, you've learned, don't always look like fireworks. Sometimes they look like leaving the party early because your body said enough. Sometimes they look like taking a deep breath before answering a text that makes your stomach twist. Sometimes they look like saying, "I need space," and not explaining what that means. These are the beginnings that matter, the ones no one sees but you. The ones that signal a shift so deep, even you can't fully name it yet, but you feel it, in your bones, in your breath, in the way your reflection looks just a little more like you each day. You stop performing peace and start practicing it, not by pretending everything's okay, but by being honest when it's not. You don't call it negativity, you call it honesty. You don't suppress your feelings to keep the vibe light. You honor your feelings because they are real. You stop demanding constant positivity and start embracing your full emotional spectrum. You cry when you need to. You rest when you must. You rage when your soul demands it. And you stop apologizing for being human. And as you become more human, you become more free. Free from the need to be understood. Free from the need to be liked. Free from the stories that kept you small. You understand now that freedom isn't found in doing whatever you want. It's found in doing what's true. And truth is not always convenient. It doesn't always make you popular. But it does make you whole. And that wholeness, that's what you've been seeking all along. You're no longer waiting for permission to take up space. You're no longer waiting for someone else to say, "Yes, you're allowed to be here." You've claimed your place, not with a shout, but with a steady presence. You exist without apology. You speak without filtering. You move without explanation. And in doing so, you invite others to do the same, not by teaching them, but by being yourself, fully, honestly, tenderly. And there are still days when it's hard, days when the old patterns call your name, days when you forget your worth, days when you wonder if you're doing it right. But even on those days, you stay. You don't abandon yourself. You don't run from the discomfort. You sit with it. You breathe through it. You remind yourself that healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. And every time you return stronger, softer, more you. Because at the heart of this journey, that's what it's all about. Not becoming someone new, but returning to the truth of who you've always been. The you that doesn't need to be perfect. The you that doesn't need to perform. The you that is worthy simply because you exist. And in that truth, there is nothing left to prove, nothing left to chase, nothing left to earn. Just this moment, just this breath, just you as you are. And that finally is enough. There's a shift that happens when you stop living your life on autopilot. It doesn't start with a thunderclap or an epiphany that knocks you off your feet. It begins quietly in the smallest decisions. The way you pause before saying yes out of habit. The way you take a deeper breath before entering a space that once stole your energy. The way you begin to ask yourself not, "What should I do?" but "What feels aligned?" And for the first time in maybe years, the answers that come aren't driven by fear or obligation. They're guided by something softer, something wiser, something inside you that had been whispering all along, but you were too busy surviving to hear it. Now you've made room to listen, and what you're hearing is nothing short of profound. You hear the voice of a self you've forgotten. Not the voice that tells you what to fix or who to impress, but the voice that remembers what joy used to feel like. The voice that knows what peace tastes like. The voice that doesn't rush, doesn't beg, doesn't bargain. It simply says, "Come back." Back to stillness, back to simplicity, back to soul. You start to feel that shift in your relationships, where once you might have twisted yourself into shapes to be understood, now you understand that some people are not meant to understand you, that their inability to meet you in your depth says more about their limitations than your worth. And instead of explaining, you exhale. Instead of convincing, you release. You don't chase what leaves anymore. You let it go, not out of bitterness, but because you've finally made peace with the idea that not everyone is meant to walk with you to where you're going. You start valuing silence, not the silence of being unheard, but the silence that invites you inward. The kind of silence that makes space for reflection, for awareness, for remembering. You stop needing to fill every moment with stimulation. You find calm in just sitting. You rediscover what it means to be with yourself without trying to escape. There's no need to impress, no need to perform. You allow yourself to just be, and that permission is the beginning of everything. And as you just be, something inside you begins to heal, not through effort, but through allowance. You stop trying to rush your healing, stop treating it like a problem that needs solving. You begin to hold it like you would hold a child, gently, patiently, with love. On the days when old wounds surface, you don't panic, you listen. You let the feelings rise without pushing them down or picking them apart. You know now that healing isn't linear. It loops, it spirals, it deepens. And every time you revisit something you thought you'd already healed, you approach it with more wisdom, more self-compassion, more strength. You begin to see time differently. You no longer feel the pressure to hurry through your life. You recognize that you don't need to catch up to anyone. There is no race. There is only your rhythm. And the more you trust that rhythm, the more life begins to unfold in ways that feel organic, not forced. You stop chasing outcomes and start cultivating presence. You understand now that a meaningful life isn't measured by milestones. It's felt in the moments where you are fully here, fully honest, fully connected to yourself. You begin treating your needs like they matter, not as inconveniences to be silenced, but as messages to be honored. You stop overriding your own voice to make someone else comfortable. You stop walking into rooms where your soul has to hold its breath. You don't beg to be chosen. You don't audition for affection. You know now that the right people will never require you to abandon yourself in order to belong. And when it gets hard, because it will, you don't run. You sit with it. You sit with the ache, the doubt, the fear. You let it speak. You let it pass. You don't make it wrong. You simply let it move through you. You've learned that emotions are not enemies. They are invitations. And the more you welcome them, the more you realize how much wisdom they carry. Anger shows you where your boundaries were crossed. Sadness reveals what mattered. Anxiety uncovers where you've stopped trusting. Each feeling is a thread leading you back to yourself. You no longer chase the high of constant productivity. You recognize the sacred in slowness. You cook a meal without rushing. You take a walk without a destination. You read a book without checking the clock. You let your life breathe. And in that breath, you realize something you've always known but never lived. You don't need to do more to be more. You already are. You stop punishing yourself for the times you didn't know better. You stop judging yourself for the years you spent asleep. You thank yourself for surviving. You recognize that even your coping mechanisms were forms of love, misguided maybe, but rooted in a desire to stay safe. And now that you feel safer in your own presence, you're able to choose differently, not from a place of shame, but from a place of care. You no longer change to be worthy. You change because you are worthy. You stop holding your breath in anticipation of something going wrong. You stop living in survival mode. You allow yourself to soften, to rest, to enjoy. You trust that you don't have to earn your right to feel good. That joy isn't a reward for pain, it's your birthright. And the more you allow joy into your life, the more you realize how natural it feels, how true, how needed. And when others question your journey, when they don't understand your new boundaries, your softness, your silence, you don't explain, you don't shrink. You don't twist your truth into something more palatable. You smile gently, you wish them well, and you walk on, because you know now that this path isn't about being understood. It's about being whole. You find yourself becoming more selective with your energy. You no longer spend it in conversations that drain you. You don't offer it to people who can only see you when you're useful. You stop pouring into cups that have no intention of ever pouring back. You've learned that love is not measured by how much you can give. It's measured by how much of yourself you can keep while giving. And you've decided to keep all of you. You become more honest, not just with others, but with yourself. You stop pretending that certain things don't hurt. You stop telling yourself to just get over it. You let the truth land, no matter how uncomfortable, because you know now that the truth will always lead you home. And in all of this, in the slowness, the honesty, the stillness, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Safety. Not the kind that comes from predictability or control. The kind that comes from self-trust. From knowing that no matter what happens, you won't abandon yourself. You won't shame yourself. You won't lose yourself. That kind of safety is rare. But once you find it, you realize it was what you were searching for all along. You stop seeking external permission to feel whole. You realize you've always been whole. You just forgot. And now, piece by piece, breath by breath, choice by choice, you're remembering. And this remembering, it's not just healing you, it's freeing you. There is something quietly revolutionary about no longer rushing your own becoming. When you stop trying to arrive somewhere, when you stop measuring your progress against someone else's highlight reel, when you step off the treadmill of always needing to be better, faster, more impressive, something shifts inside you. The frantic pace begins to slow. The shame begins to melt, and you finally feel yourself settling into your own rhythm. The one you lost long ago under layers of urgency, comparison, and self-doubt. It's not that you no longer grow. In fact, you grow deeper now than ever. But the growth is rooted. It's not desperate. It's not loud. It's not for show. It's the kind of growth that happens in silence, under the surface, far from applause. The kind that builds a foundation so strong, you no longer shake every time the world does. You find yourself craving authenticity in every form. You no longer tolerate shallow conversations, not because you're arrogant or cold, but because you've tasted depth and can no longer be nourished by anything less. You want to talk about real things, what scares you, what moves you, what you're learning, what you're grieving. You want to know what people believe in when they're alone in the dark, what breaks their heart and what they do with the pieces. You want to know who they are without the masks, without the filters, without the performance. And because of that, you show up that way too. You don't offer perfection. You offer presence. You offer truth. You offer a space that says, you don't have to be anything but yourself here. And that space in today's world is rare, precious, holy. You also begin to understand your own limits, not as something to be ashamed of, but as boundaries that protect your aliveness. You stop saying yes to everything. You stop answering every call, every text, every pull on your energy. You stop apologizing for needing rest, for craving solitude, for choosing stillness over stimulation. And yes, it confuses people at first. Those who were used to your over-functioning, your constant availability, your eagerness to please, they may fall away. They may call you selfish or changed or distant. And in a way, they're right. You have changed. You have become someone who refuses to abandon yourself. And that kind of change always threatens the people who benefited from your silence. But it also draws in something new. People who don't flinch when you set a boundary. People who aren't afraid of your truth. People who don't need you to shrink so they can feel tall. These people arrive slowly, gently, without fanfare. They just begin to appear through a book you were meant to read, a conversation that lands deep, a moment that opens you. You no longer have to force connection. You attract it by being real. And that kind of connection is different. It's not based on convenience or obligation. It's rooted in resonance, mutual respect, soul recognition, and maybe most powerfully of all, you begin to fall in love with your own company. Not in a romanticized, social media kind of way, in a quiet, steady, deeply sacred way. You find comfort in your own presence. You trust your own thoughts. You create rituals that bring you peace. Lighting a candle before bed, journaling your dreams, brewing tea in the afternoon light. You make space for your feelings. You dance to your own music. You laugh at your own jokes. You become a sanctuary to yourself. And that changes everything. Because once you feel safe within your own skin, the external world loses its grip on your peace. You're no longer defined by who texts back or who validates you or what the numbers say. You're no longer seduced by the illusion of, when this happens, then I'll be happy. You are content, not because you have it all, but because you've stopped chasing what was never yours to begin with. You understand now that peace is not passive. It is a fierce, daily commitment to yourself, to your truth, to the life you're building slowly, intentionally, from the inside out. You find yourself drawn to simplicity, not minimalism for the sake of aesthetics, but simplicity as a spiritual practice. You no longer clutter your space with things you don't need. You no longer fill your time with things that don't matter. You choose fewer but fuller experiences. You let go of the need to prove your worth through how busy or important